If you're an American conservative, you know that the societal values we hold sacred are under attack. They are hanging in the balance. How can you protect those values? By staying informed. The Closing Argument will deliver news and supporting evidence you need to support and defend those values. Here's Paul Smith.
Good morning. This is Paul Smith, your host on The Closing Argument. In these podcasts, we discuss some of the important but controversial moral, political, and legal issues that affect us and our families today. Sometimes we discuss things that are not politically correct, and this may offend some of our listeners, but I'm sorry, we have to discuss them anyway. It's important. And today we're going to talk about the January 6, 2021 protests at the Capitol. Now, here we are discussing this today in April of 2022. And things are happening that pertain to this that are very important. To give you an example, I recently went to Wikipedia to see their description of what happened on January 6th. And I came away very infuriated and upset at the description of some of the things, because much of what they said was true, but embedded in it were many statements that were not correct. One of them is this. From Wikipedia, that Trump repeated false claims of election irregularities. The liberals take the position that the courts have said there were no election irregularities in the 2020 presidential election. That is a lie. The three main cases, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Georgia, there were several cases there that the Trump campaign brought, and none of those cases turned out in favor of Trump. But none of those cases ever involved an examination of the election processes to determine whether or not there were irregularities. The cases were decided on other grounds, such as standing, and I even dispute those. But the best characterization I heard at the time, January 2007, was given by, frankly, Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky, when he basically said, well, there very likely were irregularities, but every state certified their results, and we don't have a court that agreed that they were wrong, and so you're kind of stuck. And that, I think, is the best analysis, not to say that there were no election irregularities, and not to call Trump a liar for saying that there were.
Well, I would ask anybody out there that's a rational human being, if there were not any election irregularities, why would one party try to stop the other party from witnessing the votes in the way things were being progressed? They were kept away from it because when you're doing things by the book, you should be an open book and people can witness everything. We know in Philadelphia, for instance, some of the people were kept more than 100 feet away. And if you're doing it by the book, you don't need to keep anybody away. That tells you everything you need to know.
Thanks for making that point. Now, I'll tell you, as a lawyer in a court of law, it doesn't quite get you where you need to go if you're trying to overturn it, but it certainly is an indication that there's a problem. And by the way, I forgot to introduce my guest, and my guest is Rodney of New Windsor. How are you doing, Rodney?
I'm doing pretty good.
So again, Rodney is the beloved conservative radio voice in Frederick, Maryland. Those of you from this area know him very well.
I don't consider myself conservative. I try to be the voice of reason. I'll take whichever side, to me, makes common sense. I'm a big believer in common sense.
Well, your common sense, in my opinion, basically puts you on the side of conservatism most of the time.
Well, I think conservatism tends to be on the side of common sense. And I'm more than happy to make arguments with people that disagree with that.
Now, let me mention another thing that really bugged me when I read the Wikipedia account. Here's a quote from it. More than 2,000 people broke into the building, occupying, vandalizing, and looting it, assaulting police officers and reporters, and attempting to locate lawmakers to capture and harm. It's the last part of that really irritates me. If there was someone there that was trying to locate and harm lawmakers, I never saw it. And they're somehow going into speculating is clearly what this is.
Well, I would go with Wikipedia. please cite the examples of those, because there was hundreds of thousands of people there. There weren't any lawmakers harmed. There weren't any buildings or so forth destroyed. It's funny, in these other towns like Seattle and Minneapolis, buildings were burned, stores were looted and everything. You're making statements that cannot be backed up by actual facts, where I can show you smaller things that the other side did, Black Lives Matter or whatever, where the damage is very visible. There's no question. Nobody argues that.
When this happened in early January, and we listened to the news reports on January 6th and 7th, one of the first things to be broadcast was the people who were killed as a result of the protesters. And now, a year and a half later, they say there were 4 people that died. Actually, 5, counting Ashley, the lady who was killed by the Capitol Police person. Right. But the other 4 people that died that had nothing to do with the protesters. One of the first reports was that the one police officer had been hit with a fire extinguisher and died from that. Turns out he did die, but he actually was a Trump supporter, and it wasn't because of any hit like that. That's right. It was just a false report. So as we're living through this in the moment in time, there were many reports out there that were just not true. So this kind of bugged me. Well, at this point now, one of the things that has happened, Congress, that is the House of Representatives, has created what they call a select committee on January 6th. Initially, they were trying to get a Senate, they called it kind of a bipartisan committee. That never got off the ground. And when the House started to do this, Speaker McCarthy wanted Jim Jordan and what was the other guy? Jim, I forget his name, from Indiana. Anyway, another congressman.
It doesn't matter, but the point was it's not bipartisan because
Jim Banks.
Because for bipartisan, by definition, it means both sides get to choose representatives to the panel, which never happened. So by definition, it couldn't be bipartisan.
So Pelosi refused to let Banks and Jordan be on the committee because she said they opposed certifying the election results. Now, and we had a previous broadcast that talked about that, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It was a constitutional right they had, and that is a bogus claim. What happened, the select committee then has become basically a partisan, non-bipartisan, just a partisan effort, a sham.
Well, it's basically a communist effort, because this is the way communists operate. We make up the committee. You don't have any say.
So one thing that has happened, there are only 2 Republicans on it. They couldn't get more than 2 because most Republicans wouldn't serve out of protest. But Liz Cheney of Wyoming and Adam Kinzinger from Illinois are on it. They are now the pariahs among Democrats. They're probably both going to lose their elections because Republicans are furious with them for giving some kind of credence and respectability to this committee that is an absolute sham, and it's a political stunt. By the way, I'm quoting Senator Leader McCarthy and Jim Jordan for those name calling things. That's what they call them. So one of the things that is unfolding with this committee, they have now taken testimony, this committee, from close to 100 people. Just a few days ago, they had Ivanka Trump and her husband, Jared Kushner, were there. I don't know what testimony was given because right now nobody knows. But some of the people have refused to appear for different reasons. And so one of the things that will happen in the future is we'll decide whether or not people had a right to disregard subpoenas to testify before that committee.
Well, I don't think much is going to come out of this, but as the Democrats already know, time fades all memory. If it doesn't achieve its goal, they'll never talk about it again. And that's what they do. They don't talk about it. They never talk about their failures.
Well, one of the reasons Jim Jordan was anxious to get on it, as I heard him say on TV, is he wants to find out why Pelosi didn't authorize the police to come in. Requests were made of her to authorize more police to come in to patrol the Capitol on January 6th because they knew a lot of people were coming.
Well, I can guarantee you, Queen Nancy, that's probably the primary reason she didn't want him there, exactly for that. You don't want the Queen being showed what she didn't do. Queen's not going to tolerate that.
So I mentioned the problem Pelosi had with Jordan and Banks in that they voted to, well, they didn't vote to certify Biden as president. Of course, that's the same thing that happened when some of the Democrats didn't vote to support Trump, years before.
Yeah, but it also happened with George W. Bush. Gore didn't.
That's right.
He didn't concede either. I love the Democrats. They have what I call selective amnesia. They don't remember any of the cases where they protested elections, the hanging chads, as they talked about back then, and this vote, but they're quick to remember all the things that don't go their way.
Well, it's worth mentioning now, remember that Trump was actually impeached a second time because it was alleged that he interfered wrongfully in this, that he caused the riot. And it was alleged as part of his impeachment that he had improperly threatened the Secretary of State of Georgia, a guy named Raffensperger. That story has since been debunked by the Washington Post. There was a conversation, but there was nothing improper about it.
Well, I find it very interesting that the Washington Post debunked it because they're not typically on the Republican side.
Well, it was their story that was fraudulent in the first place, but it's been exposed as it was a false story.
Well, there's so many false things going on all around us, including Biden's son. I mean, and people don't wake up to what's going on around us. The stuff that's covered up. When you live in a non-democratic country, the ruling party makes all the rules, and they allow what you hear and what you don't hear.
This committee, the January 6th committee, is, I'm going to add some of my own adjectives. It is a sanctimonious, pseudo-patriotic group of hypocrites. And so I'm very upset with it. And one thing they're trying to do, they're really trying to get Trump. Now they're trying to get others too. And I want to talk for a minute about some of the protesters who've been prosecuted. Now, recently, this is March 2nd, 2022, a man named Joshua James, age 34 from Alabama, admitted that he conspired to use force to prevent, hinder, and delay the execution of the laws of the United States governing the transfer of political power, the seditious conspiracy. Now, on the one hand, nobody cares. On the other hand, many people have been convicted of trespassing or different minor crimes. This is the only one I'm aware of where someone has pleaded, he actually pled guilty to a conspiracy, seditious conspiracy. So sedition is an attempt to overthrow a country. And, one of the accusations against Trump is he was trying to overthrow the country. Well, it's really, when you think of it, it was rather peaceful protests, much more peaceful than the other protests that destroyed millions of dollars of property by the Black Lives Matter in the previous year.
Well, I haven't heard anybody testify to the fact that Trump asked them to do those things. I mean, if they acted on their own, I mean, nobody can be responsible for other people doing things, even if it's for them. Even if he's a Trump supporter, it's not Trump's obligation to make sure these people don't do things.
Sure. I mean, and he told them he wanted his people to go up to the Capitol and to be peaceful. What did he want? Well, he did want, it's pretty clear what he's wanted. He did not want Pence to certify the election results. He wanted Cruz and Hawley and other Republicans to ask for a delay so that he could check what he believed were irregularities in some of the states. And he lost that.
Yep.
And actually, when he did not have a case in his favor, I think he was stuck. Basically, if he's right, they cheated and won the election by cheating, but every state certified it. There's nothing you can do at that point but move on. But to accuse him of an insurrection or of sedition, there just isn't the evidence of that. There is no arms, no direction to do that. But
there's no evidence. There's no evidence whatsoever. It's all people's supposition, which is supported by nothing.
I want to go back to this guy, Joshua James. His case is going to be a significant one because they got him to plead to seditious conspiracy because he was going to use force to try to delay the execution of the laws of the U.S. And I don't know if there's a statute about that, but people would love